Okay, great. I think the setup. Um, Hi everyone, how's it going? Basically, I think this evening around Africa, in West Africa, it should be 7:30. In East Africa, it should be 9:30. So, yeah, it should be evening for everyone on this call. I hope you had a great day. Not so super excited for this session like me. So, without really wasting time, because I think more people will join us as the session goes by. They miss the earlier part. They can always go back to the recording and just catch up. We are super excited to have everyone here. Um, can we just go with like an introduction on the chats, just your name and where you are joining from? So let me just go first. So this format could work. Yeah, I could just like your name on the chat and the country you're joining in from. Let's just like do that in the next 2 to 3 minutes before um, we kick off officially. Our speaker is already here, so that'll be easy. Your name and where you're joining from. I think Steven, Nigeria. That's amazing. Okay, someone from Togo. That's great. Nigeria, Uganda, Ghana. Um, okay. Nigeria. I think you have like 3 countries. Nigeria, Togo. Okay, 4. Nigeria, Togo, Uganda, Ghana. Amazing. Another Nigeria. Okay, we can keep doing that on the chat session. Emmanuel, Nigeria, and I'm from Nigeria. That's great. So something's already here. So basically, our conversation today is around raising funds for a community initiative. This has been one of like would I say a big issue for people, for us in the community space, how we could able to raise money for initiative programs and events and projects to kind of like set up in our community. It's quite hard if you are based in Africa one, and also quite hard if the community you are running is not like kind of like backed by a organization or a company. So it's kind of like hard for you to raise money in terms of your location one, and if you are building a community or running a community that is not backed by a company. So super excited to have Samson join us to share from his own experience how we could able to raise funds for a community initiative. If you saw his tweet he made, I think earlier today, when he was like dropping a little bit of background around this topic. From his work at various organizations and also his work at Open Source Community Africa, like a perfect fit to undo this conversation. Hi, Samson.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you clearly. I think
Do I have
if
to
I
turn
can
on
hear
my
you
camera?
clearly,
Do I,
everyone can hear you clearly.
okay. Do I have to turn on my camera or
Yeah,
no?
if you want to, be amazing. But if not, no issue. Your choice. Anyone wants.
See me?
Oh, awesome! I think
Uh,
the camera is great.
okay, good.
Uh,
Sorry. I
yeah,
haven't used my workspace in like 3 weeks, so I hope my camera
ah,
is not.
yeah. So those that have workspace, not like us.
I beg, go, I beg, I beg, I beg. Um,
Okay, let get the conversation going. I already did like a little bit of introduction, but again, you can just do yours. So yeah.
all right. Okay, that's good. To be honest, I want to start by saying, to be honest, I'm like the worst. I keep saying this all every single time. I'm like the worst. This is like a disclaimer. I'm like the worst slide maker or anybody that is speaking using slides. The reason is because I don't know. I just feel like slides are weird. So I do have slides, but they're very generic. They're supposed to guide me. Let me see if I can share my screen. They're supposed to guide me. This talk not to be like a source of reference. When I'm speaking, I could possibly share some links rather than use the slides. So I just wanted to just point that out. Let me see if I can do this. No, 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 no. Okay. Wait, how do I? Google is weird. So how do I present? Hmm. Wait, no, this is something. Stop presenting. I think there's a way I can. Hmm. Wait, no, this is something. Uh, stop presenting. 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 I think there's a way I can. Just give me a second. Sorry. Okay. I think it's just better for me to just use this instead. The other window. Can you? Okay. This is one window, so I can see you guys' reaction, and then I can use the other one for. Okay. So this works. Let me know if you can see. If I need to increase the font a bit.
Okay.
I'm trying not to do a presentation. But- Okay, okay, this is good. Okay, this is good now. This is what I was looking for. You see, I don't use slides, so it's been a while. Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I know me and Timothy we've been going back and forth, I believe, for months regarding this topic and this conversation. So I was like, I should probably do this before they come and drag me. So yeah, basically, the conversation here is how do you raise fund, you know, for your initiatives or projects. So the way I sort of phrased the tweet today was to kind of like look at it from a two standpoints. So basically, before I go into that, for some of you that are seeing me for the first time, my name is Samson Goddy. I am the co-founder for the Open Source Community Africa. If you're hearing Open Source Community Africa for the first time, depending on where you are, you may have been not hear about the Open Source Festival, which is arguably like a very interesting conference. We do every year. I believe we should do one next year by the grace of God. Um, yeah, so basically that's what I do. But then on my day job, right now I'm on some kind of a leave, but on my day job, I do developers relations or developers advocates, depending on how you want to call it. So basically, what that means is that I've always been in front of people all the time, whether I'm doing my side project, which is OSCA, or I'm doing my day job. Basically, that encourages me or that enable me to travel and get to meet with people. And the reason why I think this introduction is interesting is because of developers relations or my goal to like go to places and speak about what I do. That was kind of how Oscar started. So how Oscar started was I I had I was invited sometime, I can't remember what exactly, maybe 2017 or so, to come down to Mountain View, basically Google HQ. So when I got there, it was a pretty interesting conference, but then there were less people that were from Africa. That's the best and the nicest way to say that. So after the event, I spoke, and then I was like, I went to meet with the Google team. Though I've been talking to them about like doing something in Africa, but I saw it for the first time in person. And this is something I've always experienced where I'm working on a project or I'm in this company, and there's always never a lot of African people or even the Black Americans in this sense. So when I was sort of like sharing ideas, then I just realized that okay, there was a huge problem. I would say challenges rather than problem. There was a huge challenges like that surround, Africa as a country. Oh, sorry, as a country. Sorry, as a continent. Sorry, I'm a bit sleepy. And the goal here was the fact that if it, the way Africa is designed, you're from a financial standpoint, there's a lot of currencies across, every it's like almost every country has their own version of currencies. I don't know about Eastern Africa if they do have different. I know they have the shillings. I don't know if shillings spread across Kenya to Rwanda and the rest. But you get the point. The point is like in West Africa we have Naira, we have this one, we have that one. So there's just a lot of currencies. And that's why there's fintech companies, right? Like trying to solve this problem. But then on the other end, it's just very different, right? If you're building community, it's just very different. What you think would work in Nigeria would most likely not work in Ghana. So most of the time when these companies, tend to do extended versions of their community, like I'm sure like One of the popular ones that are called right now that most of you would know is the Google Developers Group. Started in San Francisco and then it expanded globally, right? And I heard Lagos was one of the biggest uh, developers or GDG region, or Nigeria is one of the biggest GDG region, right? But then the interesting thing about those things is that if you think about it, right, this is an initiative that was, even if Google doesn't say, oh, it is our stuff, it was founded by Googlers, right? So Google sees it as an initiative that empowers their developers community, right? Even if it's not, they don't brand it as a Google owned thing, they brand it as it's like something on its own, right? Which is quite interesting. But if you look, but no matter how you want to do it, right? GDG is always Google, right? Just like how Facebook or Meta now used to have the Dev C or the developer circle, right? Though they will try to brand it to be like, oh, it's independent, but at the end of the day, right? Meta technology is always going to be the primary focus, right? So that itself naturally would make funding a little bit less of a hustle, especially if you're someone that is known, to be pulling crowd or to be making people come into the conversation, or in this case, be building amazing dev fest, right? So like the dev fest in Lagos, dev fest in Port Harcourt, or in this case, dev fest South South. I know there's the South South one that moves in different southern states, and then different dev fests, across the continent. Regardless of the fact, Google would always want to support either with swags or something. But now imagine you're doing something that is not dev circle or developers group. It's now a conversations of like, how do I make this bigger? Right. So this was the exact thing that I was telling myself, in 2017 when I unofficially co-founded the Open Source Community Africa. Right. It was around this time in the evening, I and Ada were eating jollof rice somewhere in White House, Yaba. Very interesting. I was visiting Lagos, and we were just talking about like why we wanted to do OSCA and why there was not a lot of community that were primarily promoting open source. Though the DevSecco, the DevC, the GDGs and other communities that are don't even follow up and other communities that were existing back then were not exactly focusing in open source. And I felt like, given the fact that like we had a lot of what's the word? A lot of what's the word? Young people here. The average age of a software engineer in Nigeria will probably be like 20 or 21. So the open source way is always the way to go, because that makes a lot of sense, right? Now we obviously hit the obvious roadblock, which everybody that is building their community would obviously hit, right? Which is structure, governance, and support. At the beginning, we did the support side of, and on the governance side of it, the structure was also created, but there was no, I would say, direct way to look for support, right? Because we're not GDG, we're not DevCircle, we're not affiliated to any company. I was independent then, so I could not even try to make OSCA an extended of my company or the company that I work with at that time. Though I was being a core open source contributor. So I was thinking about using, in fact, that was kind of what I was doing. I was using my organization that I was serving as a board of, and I was pitching ideas on how I can use OSCA to promote whatever we're building, and that could attract fund. Well, technically that worked because the funding mechanism there was I was the biggest OSCA expense at that time. OSCA wasn't a thing, so it was more like me going to different states and some countries to talk about open source, right? That was the goal. So kind of like I was able to get companies to fund me to do that for Oscar behalf. It was like Oscar didn't have fund, but I was able to use companies to do like to promote Oscar and open source, right? That was kind of like the strategy I was using at the beginning. But then that was just for me. What about my co-founder? What about the core members, right? What are people that does not really have the resources or connection to sort of like look for companies to be as their sugar daddy, if that if that makes sense. So I started thinking more around: is this even scalable? Because what if something happened to the organization that support me? what would that what would that translate to open source, right? And to Oscar in this sense. So I remember in 2018, um, I was able to work with the River State government. For some of you that are in Port Harcourt will probably know this. I was able to work with the River State government because back then I was consulting for the government in ICT. Was able to narrate that funding into Google Summer of Code Bootcamp, right? So we were able to get interesting. Can you hear me or said my audio is not audible? That is interesting. Timothy, can you still hear me or is it going crazy? Okay, okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. Okay, I just saw your comment. That's why I paused. Yeah, so I was able to get funding from the university government to through the Office of Education, and then I think through the Office of ICT, which I was consulting at that time. So the goal was straightforward. Hey, Samson, we want people in back then River State Science and Technology, now more River State University, to kind of like go world class. That was kind of the goal. That was the aim, right? So I was able to come up with strategy, convince. Trust me, government people are so hard to work with. I was able to convince whoever I was convincing, and then they approved it, and then it was now, let's get this working, right? So we chose, I can't remember the place in River State University anymore, but it was a pretty big place. I think that could help. I think was about probably 500 people capacity, but I don't know if we were up to 500. I think we're between 200 ish. That was our first ever meetup. So it was kind of like co-organized by OSCA. So I was able to use that funding to get some OSCA members into River State, both in and out of Lagos. So I think that was, I don't know if it was Ada's first time in Port Harcourt, but Ada came over. There were like a lot of people that were there, which was pretty great. We did the event. It was successful. If, in fact, we saw results after the event, and then the government people were like, "Oh, we should do this more." But then obviously, now there was always a political side of it, right? And I at that time I started trying to do less governmental stuff and started focusing more of private, if that makes sense, because I just like being private. Um, so now that was where Oscar sort of like started, like really, really. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because of what I'm going to be explaining next when it comes to motive. Um, so, like I said, this is more of like a talking point rather than a slide. So please forgive me if you see anything funny there. So I think so this was 2018. So 2018 wasn't, I would say, was when we are trying to figure out what was Oscar's initiatives, and we were doing try and error. We started hosting some events. Most of the money at that time was coming from my pocket, which was not scalable, just like any founder. So I was now thinking like, okay, I have a lot of people. I've been doing open source for 10 years or so, or 8 years or whatever, about 9, 10 years that time. Like, and these are things I've been hearing. I've been hearing about, oh, we want to expand Africa. Oh, we want to do this. I want to do that. And then when I hear from other people in Africa, oh, why are you not in the Python community? Or why are you not doing this? Or why are you not doing that? There's a conversation of like, oh, we didn't get funding because of this, that. Like, there was just a lot of outrageous things. And at that time, I was not very community driven, to be honest, in this part of the world. I was very Western, if that makes sense. So Oscar was like something that made me realize the struggle of what it is to build community in Africa. So that was kind of I was learning it. I was not an expert. I was an expert somehow in the Western world, but I was not an expert in this part of the world, which was very, very funny because my own was just at an event, if I feel like, right? So it was not like I'm trying to build something here. And that was when I discovered that Omo, he choke, right? Um, anyways, the first thing I realized, right, when I was trying to do Oscar was the most obvious side, which was building communities across the continent is very difficult, right? There are a lot of languages, a lot of cultures, and what you think, like I explained earlier, would work in one side wasn't going to work in the other end. And I'm sure, like, I'm not coming to tell you guys what community building looks like because this is a community building or community-based organizations. So I'm sure all of you here are probably crazy experts. But the reason why I'm saying this is because I wanted to make sure that I understand what the goal looks like, right? So I can be able to defend that if for any reason someone is telling me what's the value. um, I was able to do that, right? I remember 2018, towards the end of 2018, I think. Yeah, towards the end of 2018, if I'm not wrong. My memory is a bit funny. I had an opportunity to go for something independent that was not Oscar related in London. So when I got to London, I think at that time, Microsoft was just wrapping up the purchase of GitHub. So there was just a lot of tension around GitHub and Microsoft at that time. But then it was actually very interesting because that meeting was a closed door meeting in the UK. And a lot of key people in Microsoft, the GitHub ex leadership, and like some other organization like Google and the rest were in that room. So I was in a room, sorry, with execs, Google execs, Microsoft, like literally like every company at that time that was really big was in that room. So I was kind of the only IC person or probably independent person. At some point, I felt out of place, which was typical, right, because of the age gap. But then the thing here was like, yes, I was there for a private thing related to my private work, but then I wanted to use that as a way to like scale Oscar. And so what did I do? I thankfully, to give you context, that group was the Sustain OSS group. So it's called Sustain OSS. So basically, Sustain Open Source Group, right? I don't know. That's kind of where the whole Sustain Africa came out from. Just so you know, but it was a Sustain OSS group. So it's a group that they come together to discuss ways to sustain open source and to promote open source, right? Which was kind of my job. So sitting there, hearing different ideas, hearing how companies are talking about challenges that they have billions of dollars. They don't know how to give the billions of dollars to open source. They don't know how to give the millions of dollars to communities. They don't know how to give thousands of dollars to events. Like, oh, we have this budget, but we don't know how to spend this budget. So we typically just give it to any already made or some organization that we know or someone that is referred by our employee, or we just do some random giveaway or whatever. So it was like, wow. So there's like a lot of money, right? But the problem is this this money somehow, with all the sharing palliative and everything, none of them is looking downwards, which is so fun because that event was in the UK. If you look downwards, there's like a huge continent, Africa, and raising funds is just difficult. So thankfully, I did a quick discussion around why you should fund events in Africa, right? As using Oscar as a case study, very smart. So by doing so, a lot of people were just like, "Wow, okay, this is new." I was like, "Why is it new? Like, are you telling me that you don't have employees?" And that's one thing you need to understand, right? The key holders or people that are much decision makers in these companies, you never see them in Africa, right? They always either they hire them from Africa and move them to the US or someplace in Europe. So they always lose touch to the community, if that makes sense, right? So they're like, oh wow, I didn't know about this. I didn't. Wow, okay. How do we improve this? So thankfully, I was able to get some people's emails and whatever, and then but that was not kind of, I would say, the win for Oscar. Um, Interestingly, one of the co-organizers of that event was running something called Open Source Collective or Open Collective, right? So Open Collective, I'll drop the link here so you can check it out. Um, Sorry, you can drop in questions, please. I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. So Open Collective, I'll just drop the link on the chat. So Open Collective is a platform. Like this is a typical platform where you know basically transparency is the heart of it. It is a system that is designed to enable legal and financial toolbox. So basically, it's like a bank, sort of, in a way, but for projects and communities. And then within the Open Collective platform, you have legal organizations, right? Like I would say umbrella organizations that are there. So one of the popular one that I'm sitting on the board of the collective is called the Open Source. Sorry, Open Source Collective. Let me see if I did type that right. Yeah, so Open Source Collective. So this is like an umbrella organization. So I was talking to the founder of this platform and also talking to the one of the board for this organization. I was like, yo, there's this thing I'm working on. I have a problem with funding. It's global. It's supposed to be in the whole of Africa, but also connecting the US. So basically, I met their terms and condition because each umbrella organization has requirements in order for them to host a project, right? So what you're seeing here are lots of projects. They are very, very big projects like Webpack, some other things that you probably know if you're a dev or whatever, F-Droid or whatever, right? And then if I come down here and I do load more, I'm sure you probably would see like lots of organization. But then one interesting thing here is they have their mission. So each organization does have their mission, and then in terms of sponsorship, where you can apply. If you apply, they approve, and then the board. This is me here and some other people, and then different ways that because it's a non-profit, but it's an umbrella non-profit that can host other non-profit under. You can sort of like contribute to them, but then they serve as a legal body, right? It's like a registered body, like a legal body in the United States that give other communities and organizations like legal entity in the US, which was my original goal to sort of like put OSCA in the US. So it makes it a lot easier to receive money, right? Because my connections were mostly in that side. Maybe not effective in Africa, but very, very Western centric. Um, so, and then they do events, like I said, like they do a couple events. And then I think when it comes to budgets, here, please, this is not my money. Please, in any way, don't see it as my money. Like, for example, you see that, they've raised this year alone, or towards this year alone, they've raised around $4.2 million for basically a lot of open source project that is under them. And within the 4.70 million, they've spent like 3.7 million. And then like basically like you can see as a donor, as a whatever, you can see things. Yeah. And within this money, organizations tend to pay people when they want to and all that. And then one of the organization here is obviously OSCA. Um, um, wow, that's interesting. Where's the name of the OSCA organization? That's interesting. Uh, okay. So the Open Source Community Africa, like I explained, which is what I co-founded, is kind of, if you see here, is under the Open Source Collective. So they kind of host our organization in a way, right? So it was pretty straightforward. We do events, we do projects, we do a lot of things, but then I'm going to be explaining more on what is our future goal in like a couple minutes. But then it was straightforward. We wanted to do an event where, like Oscar Fest, where organization can sponsor, but then it was just very difficult. So coming to this platform and then working with the connections that I had, and also with initiative, it was so easy for, not easy, but it was so sort of easy, maybe because of the way I made it in a way, right? It was so easy for organizations like Google, Meta, whatever, to give us. These numbers are not accurate. So for example, I know Google has given us probably more than 50,000, is it 50? Yeah, probably between, I would say probably more than $30,000 comfortably. How many times have we done Oscar? 3 years. So let's say like close to 50,000 in a way. Yeah, I'm going to explain. Yeah, I'm going to explain that part. And then Meta didn't sponsor this year, but I know Meta has done about same 40 or so. But Google has given us the most money, right? And then there are other organizations that are giving us this money in this sense. And then obviously within there, like we have my team, my close team, and whatever. And then basically that's kind of like how Oscar started from, low ideas to, big idea. And we've done, I think, if I'm not wrong, I've raised close to $500,000 or close to within 2018 to 2023, hoping to make that bigger. And I'll explain why I need to raise more money for that. So, but using Oscar as a strategy, right? It was kind of straightforward because now um, I've been able to do like one of the things I learned, right, was the fact that, oh, I'm very good in telling people stories, right? Which is one of the cool thing here. Is first of all, it's like when you're building a community, regardless of whatever you're building, right? It's like, okay, so I want to build a community of designers. That's on you. Now, how do you tell that story? Like, how can you convince somebody that's looking at you to like tell them that, oh, this is a very good idea, and in a way that they can resonate with it. So I'm a very good storyteller. I'm sure you probably know this right now, because I tend to personalize whatever I'm talking about, maybe because of my job on the DevRel side, but I always try to personalize things. And by doing so, it makes it so relatable, right? So that's why Oscar Fest has been very successful, because whenever I'm jumping on the call with whoever is supporting us, there's always this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is the story behind it, right? And then that sort of like makes it a lot easier. And then this is kind of where the whole how do you raise money comes into. um Again, like I said, this is very generic. Depending on what you're building, your audience might be very different, right? um One thing that I know is Twitter is very powerful, or X now, or whatever, right? It's really, really powerful, because when you're building stuff and you've been able to classify things, you've been able to test run it with, it's like you're building a startup. Imagine you're trying to build a startup, right? If you have an idea, like zero idea, and then let's say you translate that idea into slides, who do you think would most likely invest in that idea first? Think about it. It's always your family and friends. That's why they call it family and friends round, right? And that family and friends round is people that believe in you, not necessarily your idea, right? It's like, I like Samson, I trust Samson, we work together, take this money. Now, what that would mean is probably your own money, or your co-founder money, or your core member money. You guys have used little of that money, and then you've done something, because you have to do something. Trust me. Let's say it's a test run or something. Now, when you've done those things, you have pictures or whatever. You can be able to like gather that small thing with data driven whatever, and then use that to build campaigns, right? That was kind of what we did in Oscar, right? Like I told you, that story I was explaining to you, River State government, that one, personal money, blah, blah, blah. I was able to use that, talking about how I was able to fund it myself, and the entire company, like, oh, if I can do this with this amount of money, imagine what your money can do. And then, and again, use that to and make your research, make very big research, because you have to relate why companies need to invest in you, whether it's for profit or it's not for profit, right? Regardless of whatever, companies always tend to think about it from a two-way standpoint, except maybe they're just dashing you the money, which is very, very hard. But again, social media is a really great way to diversify your audience. Now, the sponsorship of partnership, I would say partnership was interesting. And one of the ways I was able to do partnership over the years in Oscar Fest, we've been opportune to get the money that we want, right? Either I surpass our funding goal, and then I use our funding goal too. So technically, sometimes I use Oscar to fund other organizations, right? Or I tend to use my own personal money to other organizations, right? But the process here is the fact that this year was so interesting. The economy is terrible, like terrible, right? People are losing their jobs, company are basically messed up. So to be honest with you, we wanted to not do Oscar Fest this year, right? Towards the end of the year, I told my team straight to the point that, yo, I personally am not comfortable and I'm not very confident that Oscar Fest can run. They were like, okay. And then suddenly I was like, let me see if I can change strategy, right? We have to go back to the drawing board. We're like, we want bigger people, like we want bigger numbers, because this year was bigger, over 2,000 people that came. But at the same time, we'll probably have the lowest funding over the years. Now, think about this: 2020, high funding; 2022, high funding; this year, economic crash, Nigerian inflation. The week of Oscar Fest was literally the week they took off for subsidy, right? So it was really, really crazy. Trust me, it was the craziest thing that I've done in my entire life when it comes to fundraising. Now, we did not meet our goal. The initial goal that I created, that was the fail safe goal to run things minimalistic way that might not be great. We didn't get to that, right? I think the goal was to hit $100,000. We didn't hit that. But the way I was able to do it was the fact that I had to leverage partnership a lot. So even the venue, I was like, yo, we use Landmark. I was like, guys, how about we do this, right? I know this is your the amount of money expected from us, but Timothy, I know it's almost 30 minutes and I'm running up. Is it 30 minutes on the dot or it's an I'm trying to find out the hours. I see it's already 8. I don't know how much I'm supposed to be speaking. Uh,
It's a 1 hour session, so I think like there's 30 minutes. There's another 30 minutes, so like 8:30.
okay, okay, that's fine because I'm even rounding up. I just saw it in my time here. So basically, what we started doing was we started leveraging partnership from food. Like if you notice something, how many of you here were at Oscar Fest this year? Like I don't know. Okay, okay, I can see numbers now. Imagine 2,000 people. If you times again inflation, everything is already crazy, right? The week of Oscar Fest or the week before Oscar Fest, uh, subsidy, everything was crazy. I think if I remember vividly well, the cheapest food per head that I saw was 3,000 naira per head for food, like jollof rice, chicken, whatever at that time. Now imagine 3,000 naira times 2,000, um, breakfast, lunch, and maybe say dinner in 2 days. Now let's do that math. That alone is going to even eat up the fund that we've raised, right? So we were like, how do we do this, right? Nigerians love their jollof rice. It has always been a culture of whatever people do in an event. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something that will either go well or people are going to drag me or Oscar on Twitter. And of course, because I'm a stubborn person, I always had to go to the craziest idea part. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that it's not going to be easy. I have to be sensitive. I understand not everybody is the same. But two things: I'm going to increase our price tickets, and I'm going to make sure people are going to buy food. Those are two things. Now, when we initially did it, right? The goal was, regardless of because in Nigeria, if you're doing an event, right? Because I'm using an event strategy here, right? Regardless of whatever you're doing, you would never please anybody. So that's one thing that I want to share. You would not please anybody at any point, right? It was pretty simple. Um, we wanted to do an event for 2,000 people. We are way, way, way down on funding. We still want to do the event in the most nicest way possible. In fact, whatever you guys saw at Car Fest this year was like 40% of what was the overall plan. What you saw was just 40% of the plan. 60% we couldn't do it. But nobody knew because of the way we were able to manage things, right? But it was just 40%. Trust me, there was a lot of things we wanted to do, even get the whole of Landmark as a whole, but that didn't work. So it was now, how do we do this event? Because we've announced Oscar, we started PR, and there was no way for us to say, oh, we don't want to do it again. So I had to tell the team that we need to do this, but I don't know how. Worst case scenario, we'll go back to Zone Tech Park. Or worst case scenario, if we can't afford Zone Tech Park, we look for somewhere cheaper. But what we were able to do was we were able to work with the community. Yes, initially when we released the ticket money, trust me, I saw some funny comments, which was interesting. But then that alone was able to pay some percentage of the meal that we originally, not like the meal for everybody, but the original number that we want to give. Then it was not like, okay, how do we now cover for the other meal, right? Um, and that's where the idea of partnership came in. I called Prosper, and Prosper told me, wow. I was like, yo, Eden Life needs to do something. They were like, oh, more funding, no deal. I was like, yeah, I get it, I understand. But what if we strike this deal? We're going to buy this percentage. We're going to make you our sole vendor for food, but at the same time, we want you to sell food, but in a very discounted rate. Deal? Deal. So that's how we're able to pay for some amount of food, and then food were made available at the venue with the cheapest rate possible from Eden Life. Awesome, and a lot of options. And thankfully, with the venue that we chose, there were a lot of vendors that were outside. So just in case whatever, whatever, whatever. So you see, we didn't spend a lot of money within that end. And then so basically we use that same strategy for other things. Our stage, all those things, we basically use that strategy to raise extra fund. And that was how Oscar Fest 2023 happened. It was like magic for me and the planning team. It was like, oh my, this thing flop, it flop. But we went to Twitter, everybody was so excited. We did like, pictures. People were like taking pictures and doing the whole 360 thing, playing FIFA and everything. Though we wanted more FIFA, but again, it was like, less funding. But then the interesting thing here was even the most perfect strategy that I did within this year's failed. Not failed, but like there was a lot of setback because again, reality had to kick in because the market was crazy. So that itself made me to think outside of the box. I'm like, yo, this thing is not working. I need another funnel for funding. And then I was able to directly make the community to invest in our conference. And remember, I know people will be like, why am I paying this amount of money? Think about it. Oscar is an open source organization. It's also a non-profit. $0, zero. And I'm saying this with my full chest. $0 doesn't come to me. In fact, I spend more money in every single Oscar Fest, making sure that because most of the time our funding goes to the point that it hits our personal account, right? So, for example, within the week of Oscar Fest, I was just sending people money to for people to pay for Uber, for people to fly in, for people to pay bus to travel, because our funding budget was almost zero. We didn't have it, and then that was the week of fuel subsidy, right? So I was just constantly, in fact, I don't know if some of you follow me on Twitter. I was even asking my friends, I made tweet, yo, if you want to match this thing, let me know. Like it was crazy. That week was so crazy. But then at the end of the day, I was even able to use the community of people to raise extra money that was not related to the festival to be able to solve some component of the festival. Now, the interesting thing here is again, like I tried to explain, right? When you have a well-defined goal, like you have that, and you have the right team, right? By breaking your goals down, it makes it a lot easier for you to understand who typically fund ideas like this, regardless of whatever you're doing. If you're building a design community, right? Your default funding organization right now I can think about would be Figma, right? Because Figma is literally, organization that pride themselves to be design first, right? They have basically Figma is a design company, right? But then if Figma somehow doesn't want to give money, you can tend to like look for alternative of Figma, people that are in the competitive space with Figma, and then go ask them for money. Say, yo, you have these numbers, you have this, and then you're like you don't tell them, oh, your alternative or whatever, but you always have to think about what is it in it for them as just the way you want their money. So that's kind of the strategy that I use. Because sometimes I go within competitions. Like I take money from this person to this one. In fact, there was one time, I don't know if there's any Google out here, but there was one time I was able to make Google and Facebook to pay for. So I wanted one headline. When I saw that, something just told me I was able to, I could take more money from Facebook. I went to tell Facebook, hey, Alpha, Google has done this, so and this is what Google is going to get. Do you want to get it or not? Some companies, they are very sassy because that's like, okay, how about to give you this money plus extra money so you can give us this thing? Yes, it might be coming from a place of privilege or it might be coming from a place of establishment because we've done Oscar first and then, myself, I've had my own personal branding or whatever. But the thing here is that the way you think, it's about who is your primary donor and what is the space are they playing, and then you look out for the alternative within the companies, and then you go towards that people. Typically, the way you do it is again, nobody wants to give money to any event that doesn't have PRO, because typically funding usually comes because I've led the DevRel team. Funding typically comes from marketing budgets, right? When I was leading DevRel at Sourcegraph, my manager was a VP of marketing, though she was not my tactical manager in a way, like managing me, but most of the funds were coming from her own budget. So when organization comes to us, they say, "Oh, we want you to sponsor an event." When they come to me, I will look at it from a developer's angle. I'm like, "Oh, okay, we can speak about this. We can do this here. There's this type of people coming here." But then when it's about the money, then I leave it to the marketing people or the demand generation people to say, "Oh, What are the leads? Do you people have booths? Like, blah blah blah. They talk their own marketing budget, whatever. And then depending on what the organization they talk about, then there's an agreement there. So I tend to use that strategy to fund that, right? So the point here is you really, really need to have a strong community profile, either as you as an individual that is founding that organization or your organization as itself. Somebody needs to be popular, right? In fact, I think at some point I started doing less of my personal branding and I started doing a lot of um, background stuff for Oscar because again, two things can I can't be chasing my stuff and then be doing Oscar at the same time. So something had to suffer. But the point is that somebody needs to be credible enough that they can be able to receive funding. So yeah, and then like as I explained, whenever you take money from anybody, let's say you successfully pull money from somebody, you really need to be so detailed when you're giving feedback, or in this case, you're giving back data, because most of the time, though somebody will give you money, but if you don't come back and tell how you spend that money, it tends to be a little bit crazier in the future, right? In terms of going back to even if like for example now I give you 10,000 naira and say, oh, you say you want to give, you're being an initiative to give people data or internet, and then I just like, you know what? Hey Timothy, how you doing? Take this 10K, right? That's what I want to give. You don't have to give me anything. And then let's say Timothy go around spend the 10K to like 10 people, giving them 1K, and then come back and give me a very detailed story. Trust me, even if I don't have the money for next time, I'm constantly thinking about what are the ways that I can improve this donation, either personally or through my organization. You get. So again, these are things that you tend to do, like when you receive people money, and that's something that we've been able to do within Oscar because we always give very detailed report of like, oh, this is how much we raised, this is how much we spent, this is where we see this is where we see trends of spending. We spent a lot of money bringing people in. So if in the future we might want to cap this thing or do this or do that or whatever. And we always re-strategize every Oscar first, right? But then the goal here is to always make sure that you always think about these things from a dynamic standpoint. But again, remember, resonate, let your aim, your mission resonate with a potential donor or the alternative, making sure that again you personalize those ideas and make sure that they support it. And also again, like I said, you look at the second point here. I didn't even know it was even here, to be honest. It was like real life example that can emotionally connect your donor to your goal. Like, yo, you're doing this, why are you doing this? If you don't give stories, bro, nobody's going to give you anything, especially now that the market is crazy. Companies are always looking for ways to cut things off. And the fourth point, which is the fourth point, which is very, very important, is you need to constantly share information, videos that communicate your goal effectively. Whether you're building an open source project, whether you're building a community for Twitter users or whatever, regardless of whatever you're building, you're constantly sharing this information, telling your friends to reshare, do Twitter spaces about it, always put it in people's faces. And then trust me, there's going to be this organization to be like, what is going on? In fact, the first year we did Oscar First, let me just tell you one simple truth here. When I started talking to Nigerian companies, or I tried to, it didn't work out. They were telling me, oh, this, that, this, just giving me a bunch of excuses, which is fine. I understand. But then I was like, okay, fine. I went to go and look for the alternative donor, the alternative platforms abroad, and then we raised money, and then we're like, oh wow, this is good. Want to join, want to again. That's the thing. Once you just hit one person, straight to the point. So again, making sure that you constantly communicate and share your ideas again through stories and whatever. And of course, like I said, make sure that you have as much good profile as possible because these things tend to be very, very crazy. But again, like I said, regardless of your strategy, you're always going to get to the point where that strategy might not work, just like what I explained with Oscar Fest this year. And then you always need to think outside of the box and make sure you have as much diverse thought process as possible. Again, get more people into whatever you're building, and then they share the ideas and say, oh, more. Even if yes, in Oscar, I'm probably the one that is 100% responsible for raising funds. I tend to go to my other colleagues. I'm like, yo, this is not working. No. What do you think? They'll be like, oh, Why not do this? Why not do that? Ruth gave me some really crazy ideas. I was like, oh, this idea was not going to work. Oh. But then I had to think about it again. I was like, oh wow, this let's see how it goes. And it worked, right? And then at the end of the day, we're able to do what we were doing. So yeah, so that's kind of like the whole summary of the whole thing. So I want to, I would say I'll kind of end now, and then like if there's anybody that wants to ask any direct question that they want me to answer, I can do that. But officially, I would say this talk is over. I hope I've been able to communicate this point and also like spike some interest about how to raise money. But it's really really hard, trust me. But it gets easy over time. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing these amazing hacks and tips. I personally I was like focused throughout the session because again I kind of like raising funds for community manager festival happening in October. So I just like paid attention and really learned a lot regarding how we're able to go about doing that on alternative ways. I think we still have like 9 minutes remaining for this session. Let's go through the chat. Okay. Feoluwa, what about communities that are not based on open source? Hi, Feoluwa. If you're still on the call, do you mind throwing more light on that question? It's kind of like confusing for me. Are you asking if communities that are not open source could able to be part of open collective, or you are asking something different? I think you did drop another question. Does the community need a USD account? Can you just kind of like throw more light on these two questions you shared in the chat? Um, are you on a call? Hi, Fiolua. Yeah, you could just unmute your mic and just
Okay. When he was talking about open collective, I wanted to know if communities that are
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah, I
based
can.
on open source can be hosted on open collective. Okay. And then the other question about I think okay, yes. Does your community need a USD account? Like if you want to take donations from, like you said, you went to companies in the West. So if you want to take donations from these companies in the West, do you need a USD account? Do you have to register the community? Like in Nigeria now, you just register it legally and then open a USD account for all these things, or is it an individual that has to um take these donations on behalf of the community?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. So let me go back to the Open Collective platform. So I try to explain this is a very generic platform that is not open source related. It's just very generic. The one that I gave as open source was the Open Source Collective, right? So basically, what this Open Collective platform does is that it gives you access to a lot of organizations in different countries, right? In Nigeria, I was trying to set up something, but I just haven't had the time. Oh, not publicly, anyways. But the point is, there are lots of they call them the fiscal hosts, right? Sorry, let me go back to our country. Yeah, they call them fiscal hosts. So if you go to August, you get to see different fiscal hosts. A fiscal host is like okay, organization that can vouch for you, which is like um so for example now I wanted to register Oscar in the US, but I don't want to do that manually. I don't want to go and create a non-profit in the US. So I used open source collective. So technically Oscar is on that open source collective in terms of the legal side. You get me? So that's kind of what I meant by that. So if you're trying to do anything else, right? So first is coming to the if you want to use open collective, right? You have to come search through the organization and see what organization is doing which under which umbrella, and if there's something that fits in your goals, then you just go and look for the organization and say, oh, I want to be a so in this sense now let's say I want to be a let me just make this a bit practical so you get to see what I'm saying. Okay, so if you come here and then you go to apply, then they have their requirement of like what it is for you to apply, right? So when you apply, you do whatever you want to do, you create your collective automatically. you become a collective. Now, when it comes to receiving the money, Open Collective can receive Open Source Collective, like the umbrella organization, can receive money on your behalf, right, with you on this platform. But if you want to now get the money out of this platform, then there are multiple ways you can do this. So technically, for example, the easiest way I could explain is maybe you register a version of your organization in Nigeria on your country, your home country. That would itself give you access to your USD account. And then you can either do a direct transfer or you do transfer through Pioneer or whatever platform that can receive money from your fiscal host or whatever your fiscal your host used to pay out, right? So, or you don't even need Open Collective. I only use Open Collective because of OSCA and what I was trying to achieve. You can just create a non-profit in Nigeria or whatever your country is and just share your donors how to make money, where to drop the money. So regardless of whatever you're doing, it's just a matter of like making sure you have a way to receive money, and it doesn't matter how. It's just to make it to be sure that it's very very scalable. So yeah, I think that answers your two questions, Ifeoluwa.
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, that's great. Let me check if there's another question in the chat. Unbelievable access to funding. People have started again. Um, okay, like I said, the slide presentation is just to guide his own thoughts while he's giving a talk. I'm not sure if he's sharing it, but if he want to, I think we'll be able to get it across to everyone. If you have any question, we still have 4 minutes remaining. You can type on the chat. You can raise your hand. You can raise your hand, and we just unmute your mic and ask these questions.
Yeah, I just shared access to the slide. Again, it's just for talking points, but I think there's a couple points there I could use. So yeah, it's on the comment section if you're interested.
I think access denied. Just tried, assessing it.
Oh wow, it says access denied.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, interesting. Uh,
Okay. Hi, Francis. You can do it, unmute your mic while Samson is, figuring out, giving us access to the slide. Hi, Francis.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I think someone mentioned, made a question about communities are not based on open source. So I think maybe the person was meaning communities that are extended. For instance, if you look at the Google developer groups, they kind of are under Google because most programs that they do are always programmed, and most of the activities they do are always uh, sent through Google. Now, the other issue would be how would such communities also raise funds? Because I know the funds that could be coming from Google could not be enough if they really want to scale their communities. Question I would also ask.
yeah.
Okay.
So regarding that part, I think it's kind of the same model works. To be honest, like I don't think there's anything different. It's just always make sure you check with your, in this sense, the Google branding team if there's something there's going to be a problem, which I don't think. I've seen people, GDGs, DevFest folks, like I've sponsored, like I've 2021 DevFest. My company was the lead sponsor for DevFest Lagos. I think I spoke there. So again, it doesn't really matter. It's just basically the same strategy, making sure that you people relate with whatever. I know for Google it can be a little bit challenging because what if you want to talk about alternative product, right? I don't think there's a guideline that doesn't allow it because I can imagine people can talk about React over Flutter in DevFest. Again, I don't know. I'm not a DevFest community person, so I don't really know what's happening over there. But I can imagine, um, because it's a developers focused place, argument and alternatives are always welcome. I want to believe Google does not really have restrictions that restrict you from sourcing funding from competitors, especially if it's for like it's landing for the same common goal, which is always around empowering the developers community. So I don't think there should be a problem with that. But I think it's a question for whoever is in charge of the developers group in Africa or your region, whatever. But same principle applies.
Okay, great. I think that answered your question, Francis.
Sure.
Great. This is like 8:30 on the dot. That's the 1 hour we are scheduled for this event to last. Um, Not sure there is any other question. Let me go through the chat and see. None, and there is no hand raised. Okay, no hand raised. So, thank you very much, Samson, for finally having this conversation after I think it's like 2 to 3 months on this. We wanted to have this conversation during the summit period itself, but Nigeria happened. So, but yeah, I really appreciate you spending our time to come give this talk. Personally, I did learned a lot and benefited from the session, and I hope everyone who attended this session did. To those who are unable to attend it to honor the session is recorded, so we're dropping it on our YouTube channel and we're sharing across with other community managers in Africa. But yeah, this means saying thank you to everyone for showing up and do have a great evening. For those who are still going out, to have fun, have an amazing night out. To those staying